Well, thanks for giving up your Tuesday to come. Really appreciate it. As a member of the IET, it's just, it's a privilege to be here, and thank you again for coming, and also to my fellow speakers. As Barry said, I do a lot of work in Africa, and I particularly enjoy the odd African proverb. This one says, "When the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch." And I'd like to ask us tonight, are we blindly believing in the data? Broadcast media has always been about understanding audiences. It's been about predicting them and their viewing habits. Prior to when I became a consultant about 8 years ago, I was a board director of a leading independent production company in the UK. And my colleagues used to regularly go to commissioning editors of broadcasters with their brilliant programme ideas, and more often than not, they'd come back with their tails between their legs, completely confused why their brilliant idea hadn't been commissioned into a great series. It was extremely unpredictable for them. Back in 1983, in a book called Inside Primetime, author Todd Gitlin looked into how American TV networks commission their primetime programs. He came up with several suggestions, including bribery with cocaine, but what I found was the most amusing one was that the ABC network did actually employ a psychic for a short period of time to try and determine which program should be commissioned. Was it really, though, down to what clicks, or the chemistry, or something deep down inside commissioning editors and program executives where they really knew what made a great hit program? In those days it was a bit unscientific, but now we're in a potentially different world where algorithms can drive the decision-making process. People say now that we've actually got so much data, it's actually more difficult to try and sift through all the data. And of course, we've got colleagues like Think Analytics and others that do a tremendous job of harvesting the data and making the decisions out of it. Netflix, of course, is one of the primary ones. It's got a terrific amount of return path data, and it really will come to some of how they make their decisions based on that return path data in a minute. But what I wanted to also add is that the return path data for us engineers allows us to make, we think, sensible decisions. For example, if we have a video file, what about if we increase the bit rate of it? Now that means the file is larger, which means it costs more to store on our servers and more bandwidth to deliver to viewers. But if that results in greater engagement, it could result in a higher return on investment. So things like A/B testing can really help us in the algorithmic age that we're in now. In 2018, Fortune reported that Netflix accounts for something like 15% of the total downstream internet bandwidth in the whole world. And understanding the return path, as I said, for Netflix is of immense value. So if Netflix can predict hits, why does it commission films like this? This is Adam Sandler in a film called The Ridiculous Six, with some super comments on the Rotten Tomatoes website. It's one of only 36 films ever to receive a critic's score of 0. So I'll come back in a minute to how can Netflix, with such tremendous amount of return path data, make such huge mistakes. First, I'm going to look at some metrics about how commercial broadcasters can lose audience and can lose money. Conviva is an online video measurement platform as used by Sky, by CNN, by CBS, HBO, and many others. It gathers data from all the players, all the activity the player does, and it analyses them and presents it nicely to executives and engineers. And they publish quarterly insights. This insight comes from first quarter of this year, based on an activity of over 200 million viewers. And in their last update, they said, looking at online video advertising, that if it buffers for 5 seconds, you will lose 13.6% of your audience. And unscientifically, at the weekend, my 22-year-old daughter said to me, "I wouldn't even wait 5 seconds, Dad. I'd tune straight away." Now, clearly, this sort of data is nothing to do with Sky, because as I was learning earlier, Sky, and James was telling me, Sky has its own sort of closed ecosystem, so everything's tightly under control, which is even better news for Jamie and his colleagues, because Conviva also reported that up to 47% of ads fail in online video platforms, and they know this. So if you think that they're monitoring 200 million viewers worldwide, and that we know now that Sky is almost achieving 100%, if not a 100% success ratio, then it means that the other networks are doing far, far worse than 47, maybe 50, 51, 52 or whatever. So to be clear, in most TV networks, the ads is where it gets a bit hairy. Typically what will happen is you'll hand out to an ad server or a group of ad servers. And I liken it a little bit like, when DPD tries to deliver your Amazon parcel and you're not in, and it tries your neighbour and it tries your neighbour, and eventually someone opens the door. Well, it's a bit like that with the ad server. The video player is saying, has anybody got any video? And it tries to knock on a door and knock on another door, and eventually, hopefully one will answer and deliver an ad. But it's quite possible that nobody's at home and that no ad is returned. And that could be for sensible reasons. For example, ad companies or agencies might have set a frequency cap, which means only show my advert a certain amount of times. Or it could be technical. The ad server itself could be overloaded. But it's pretty serious, that there are that amount of failures. Even in the days when we're talking now about addressable ads, the theory is great that you can target an ad directly to you or to your village or small town or whatever. But for many broadcasters, they're still struggling with that kind of handoff to ad servers. So let's take a little look, as we get a little bit more geeky into this, about how data is generated. It's a really simple diagram. You've got a video player happily playing a TV program, pulled from a content delivery network on the left. From time to time, the player might call out to an ad server, and God willing, over half the time, it should get at least an ad back. Those are the orange arrows. And the player reports on the quality of experience. So, for example, what bitrate is the viewer watching? Is the play button pressed? What's the volume level? That sort of thing. And the CDN, Content Delivery Network, on the left is also generating logs. And the logs might say about the quality of service, of how the CDN is performing, what files have been delivered, as well as how much data as well. And all the different sources of data are aggregated together by the data analytics company and displayed in very, very nice interfaces. And it looks great. And dashboards and reports like this are extremely useful because they give you the very top level, but then they also let you zoom right down to individual data points. So they're super for visualizing millions of data points, and some can even let you fire off alerts. So, for example, if you've got a problem with one particular advert, your DevOps guys can know almost in real time that we're having problems serving that, so they can react around it. But let's be clear, as engineers, as many of us are engineers here tonight, about the role that blind faith actually does play in those data and the dashboards. So my first example is that since I started streaming, it must have been 20 odd years ago, and we had Windows Media Player and Real Player and Flash Player, and a few of you may remember those. We've now generally moved to the HTML5 player, which is a standard-based player, and the standards have been created by W3C, the Worldwide Web Consortium. Not in every case, but in general, a lot of playback is done with an HTML5 player. And the HTML5 player specifications do not include something called a buffering event. The player does not report in any way to say that it's buffering. But hang on, didn't Conviva say 13.6% of audience was lost after 5 seconds of buffering? That sounds pretty precise for a global world of HTML5 players that don't even tell you that they are buffering. So how did they manage to be that precise? Well, you have to calculate it. On top of the basic HTML5 player, we've got software development kits. So on the left there, you've got your one's called the Video.js, you've got your Flow Player, JW Player, Kaltura Player, and these let you build video players quickly built on the HTML5 basic framework. And what those SDKs do is they allow a calculation of buffering. They derive buffering. So they say, if you've been watching the video for 5 seconds, but the playhead has only moved 4.5 seconds on, you've probably had about half a second of buffering. But it's not precise. And as Mr. Will of Doom commented last year, has there been any progress on this issue? He's writing on GitHub. Has anyone come up with a solid method for detecting buffering? So it's contemporary, it's real, it's not just me kind of making it up, but it's real development geeks asking the same sort of questions. Here's another example. This is a viewer watching a 1-minute video in 2 different HTML5 players. The video is 60 seconds long, and the viewer stops after 49 seconds, which is the red line. So SDK A is reporting the state of the player every 5 seconds, and maybe you can guess where this is going. The viewer was last recorded as viewing content at 45 seconds. That's 9 orange lines in, which is 75% completion. SDK B, the same viewer, the same content. The state is reported every 10 seconds. The viewer was last recorded as viewing content at 40 seconds. That's 66%. So the same viewer, the same content, the same duration viewed, but maybe one is an Android device and maybe one is an Apple device. So do you see what I'm saying? That if you start to make strategic decisions based on your blind faith like that, you could be in ridiculous six territory. So what I'm suggesting to you is a couple of things, 3 things to remember tonight. We need return path data that is raw, normalized, and real time. And I'm grateful to another supplier called DataZoom in America for talking me through this and helping me get to grips with it. When I say raw, I mean unprocessed. So in my examples earlier, it was the video players and their SDKs that were processing it, and each processing it in slightly different ways. So what we really want is normalized data. So they report the basic data back to us, and we know maybe they can report buffering because maybe it's a QuickTime player that somehow, Apple have coded in a buffering event, but in an HTML5 player it can't. But we want all that raw data in our data silo so that we can then make the interpretations on it instead of allowing someone else to make interpretations for us and us not knowing it. And sometimes they use different ways of describing the same thing, like I'm paused and I'm waiting. So we kind of need to normalize the data vocabulary. And we need real-time data so that we can make those decisions. Like earlier I said, if you've got a URL that's wrong or an ad's not firing, we need to be able to consistently resolve those in pretty fast time. So we need to dig deep into the data. We need clarity about the return path data so we can make sensible decisions. And if certain audiences prefer certain types of content, we want to make the valid strategic decisions, just like Netflix. So what about this? Adam Sandler's movie, The Ridiculous Six. Last year, an article in the Journal of Popular Communication came up with this gem of a statement about Adam Sandler. Sandler is an undervalued prospect whose value is only recognized through the algorithm. Luckily for Netflix, driven by the algorithm and its own intimate knowledge of its return path, it didn't really need to pay any attention to the critics. For those that can't see it, it was, within a month of launching on Netflix, their most viewed movie ever. And for us, I think we need to make use of our return path data, not with blind faith, but with rigor and understanding. And that's why I think that broadcasting is going to need engineers for quite a few more years. So, thank you very much.